Hey guys, this is National Master Kevin Yang back at it with another video. So of course today we will be talking about the Simul and the two games I played against 23 Dragons. So let us begin. So in this game it was called a Reti defense. So we basically opened by playing our knights out, fianchettoing our bishops, and just slowing the tempo. And I do recommend this in sort of beginner opening. All you do is develop the bishop out, develop the pawn to d4, get the other bishop out, and okay, so let's begin here. Now, you could just castle here if you wanted to. I would say that's fine. You could also play the move c4 and support your pawn on d5. Or you could be like me and you say you play the pawn to d5 right away. Now here's why you want to play the pawn to d5. The reason is because you want to keep this diagonal open. And sometimes, black will play the move e5. And after, for example, you castle, black is going to play e5. And the reason why black gets more play this time is because after pawn takes pawn, let's say black plays like knight g4, right? And so you can't really take this pawn because the bishop pins the bishop. So white plays something like this. This is also a really good line. The goal is after knight takes e5, knight takes e5, knight takes e5, you play something like queen d2, e4, f4. Something like that, very comfortable. But let's say after e5, d takes e5, and after something like d takes e5, queen takes d8, rook takes d8, knight takes e5, knight takes e5, bishop takes e5, rook e8, black has play. You want to take this pawn, knight e4 will come down with a threat against the rook, right? So what I'm talking about is this, knight e4, and look at that, right? So that is something that could come down. So through these series of trades, you can see that black is slowly getting to equalize. And so I guess something to avoid that neutralization is a move d5. So you tell them that, okay, I am not allowing this at this time right now. So after knight b8, very standard by 23 Dragons, I castle, and the move e6 appears. And this is actually not a bad move. Now, in this scenario, I have a few options. I can take, I can play c4 and protect the pawn, and those are really the most viable options. So I decided to take. Now, here's why I decided to take. I want to open up this line for me, right? This guy's got to go somewhere. So I sort of guessed that our chess club member would take with the bishop, and after a move like knight g5, I'm threatening to take this bishop, get the bishop pair, and so let me explain the bishop pair a little bit. People like to say that a bishop is slightly better than a knight, and although that may be true in some scenarios, we have to look at it based on position. So for example, if you had this kind of game where the center is all wide open, right? This is where the bishops would excel because they can go far, they can reach far, they can go far. They're like quarterbacks. Well, they're like the people that they're like the receivers who catch the quarterback passes, right? So it's important to sort of realize the potential of bishops in open positions. But for example, if there is like a pawn here, pawn here, pawn here, pawn here, there's going to be little potential for the bishops, and that's where the knights are going to shine. So keep in mind that knights are better than bishops in closed positions. Bishops are better than knights in open positions. So keep that in mind. So in this case, you can see that following that principle, I'm going for the open diagonals. I'm also going for that bishop. And you can see that the computer recommends the move bishop c8 because we have to realize the value of this bishop. It's an open position, right? So in an open position, we apply the rule that bishops are slightly better than knights, right? So keep this bishop. It's a hard concept to understand because at first, beginners are thinking, well, bishops and knights are the same, right? They're both worth 3 pawns. Well, that's true, but there's a little bit more to that definition. And it's not easy to say the role of bishops in the future of the game or anything, but it's important to note that bishops are powerful pieces. So after a move like knight c6, I quickly eliminated the good bishop. F takes e6, and here I played c4. So I sort of built on the previous principle, still eyeing d5, maybe going to play e4 in the future, keep an attack on d5. But after knight h5, 23Dragons wants to trade the bishop. And here I have to ask myself, right, is it beneficial for me to trade the bishops? Well, in a sense, I have this good bishop, and our 23Dragons have these 2 knights. So in a sense, it's good. But also, I feel like if I kept this bishop on this diagonal, there might be some later pressure. So I decided, let's avoid it for now. And after something like knight e5, well, I have to consider whether this move is right. But in fact, when I looked at the taking the pawn, I looked at it and I saw a flaw with it. Now, I want you to calculate what happens after a take on b7. Did you find it? Well, after bishop takes b7, rook b8, and after the bishop moves back, there's this move knight takes c4. Why? Why, might you ask? Why? Why am I doing this? Can't just take? Well, if I take, you take my bishop, and this guy is threatened. This diagonal is all blacks. So I'd like to avoid that entirely. So that's why I decided I'm not taking that. Instead, I'm going to play the move queen d2. What I'm going to do is I'm going to showcase that previous plan of ours. Remember, queen d2, e4, and f4 in this other position that I showed you? Well, I'm going to do the same thing here. e4, f4. I'm going to try to do the same thing, right? That's the goal. But after a move like knight g4, now if you want to get it to g4, I know you might be thinking, oh, I'm putting pressure on here, right? But actually this knight maneuver, the idea of bishop here, it's a good idea, but the question is, does it achieve much, right? When you design a plan, you want it to work. You want it to do something that can change the tide of the game. And in this case, when I played the move bishop h3, our 23Dragons played bishop h6, threatening the queen, knight protecting the bishop. I played queen d4, and at this moment, this knight sort of felt really clumsy, right? It sort of felt like the purpose was a little bit lost. And so when I suggest, when making plans, always have a concrete goal in mind, right? Like, for example, you wanted to threaten my queen, put some pressure on the king side, but it felt like it didn't get much done, right? So after knight gf6, snapped off the pawn, put pressure on this long diagonal, and after a move like king h8, which is really good, and after g4, I sort of, realized that I had made a little bit of a mistake. I did not calculate all the possible moves that black had. And so, really, it's sort of, I have to think about, because in my mind I was thinking, what about queen h4? What about continuing my incentive with g4? What about just retreating the bishop? Right? I didn't know if I had to play g4 at this moment, but I realized that black was going to play bishop g7 next move. So I went in. But actually black has this move knight g7. And it's so deceptive because the knight wants to take the bishop, right? So after something like knight takes f6, knight takes e6. You can't move this anywhere because knight's going to take the queen, right? So after something like queen e4, bishop g7 comes in. You threaten the knight, and my attack is over, right? So I kind of, maybe misstepped and missed this move knight g7. In this position, I would have to think about what I was going to do. Because first of all, I could play f4 right away. After knight takes e6, I could play queen takes f6. Rook takes f6, bishop takes f6, queen takes f6, knight takes f6, knight takes f4, and I have to accept this sort of somewhat complicated two pieces against a knight, rook, and against the rook. So it's a little bit complicated, but instead, our 23 Dragons made my life a whole lot easier, played bishop g7. For the sacrifice, I took knight takes, queen d2, support the bishop, c6, actually very accurate. I found this very tricky to navigate because think about it this way. If I play bishop takes g7 here, black has knight takes g7 and threatens this piece, right? And it's sort of like I'm going to lose one of my two pieces, right? So I can't do that. So I have to play knight e3. And after knight f4, 23 Dragons proposes the idea of, okay, let's come here and let's come checkmate me. So I said check, check, lure the king to a square, bishop g4, rook e8, king h1. So notice how I'm making all these moves to get my king safe. Get my rook out this way, get my bishop here, and sort of like set up a sort of battery here. Queen g5, rook g1, d5, bishop f3, and after queen h4, you can see it on your right hand side, but the move knight f5, gf5, queen g7. So that is checkmate. So what can we learn from this game, really? Well, I guess the idea, the first one, it's very minor, but preserving the bishop. And I guess the second idea was plan with intention. And I guess that's how I won. And so, thank you for listening.